everyone for joining the talk. So gastronomy and peace is the name of my PhD research project, and this is the fourth chapter focusing on nourishing futures, women's role in agroecology, climate adaptation, and peace building. For this presentation, I will present the bigger picture of the research project, the process, the participants. I will only focus on the methodology and the data gathered for this chapter in particular, the findings, and share some of the preliminary conclusions. So the bigger picture is the project of gastronomy and peace pretends to answer how can gastronomy contribute to peace building in Colombia, focusing on food systems transformation and considering gastronomy as part of that chain. A little bit of the context. Colombia recently signed a peace agreement in 2016 between the government of Colombia and FARC guerrilla, that it's one of the oldest in the Western hemispheres. And Colombia is a country that has a high rate of inequality. 52.3 million people, of which 6.9 have been internally displaced, with over 8 million victims in the last 50 years. 13 million people suffer moderate to high food insecurity, and 8% of the GDP of the country comes from agricultural activities, and it employs 15% of the population. Most of the population working in agriculture are in diverse rural areas, and considering Colombia's inequality, there is a higher burden of armed conflict and poverty in these rural areas compared to urban areas and cities. Okay, so for this chapter, I pretend to answer how are rural women in Colombia, through their engagement in agroecological food systems, contributing to overcoming structural violence and advancing peace building in the aftermath of conflict, from a case study in Montes de Maria with a community that's an association called ASCOMAN, and the women and the role they've had there. A little bit about the theoretical framework that I use for this particular chapter is care work. So 1.6 billion women worldwide don't access the workforce because of the care work that they develop. This is opposed to 800 million men, and they list as the reasons why they cannot join the workforce as education barriers and illnesses or diseases, not care work. The other part of this, it's in Latin America. Women have 4.2 hours a day of care work as opposed to 1.8 hours from men. In transitional justice and peace building areas, we can see how literature suggests that some of the areas of interest of women within transitional justice process are associated to be with memory building, justice, truth-telling, and truth commissions, but in reality, they are also interested in addressing the root causes of conflict, including poverty, unemployment, food insecurity, among others. There's also a critique of the transitional justice framework from the feminist approach, suggesting that this has been a field designed mostly by men, thinking and putting first men's worries, and now slowly throughout the years we have been incorporating a gender perspective. Even though there has been a very important advance and improvement, there is still room to improve, as well as the contribution that women have made to peace processes, peace agreements, negotiations, peace building projects, in transitional justice, and also the role they have played as leaders in their communities and their countries. For the food systems transformation, as you can tell, I have focused mostly in agroecology. There are also some feminist critiques to agroecology, since this has also it has focused on the change of the food systems, not only from a scientific perspective, but also emphasizing that it represents a social movement, that it's interested in deep social changes and changing the power relations structures in place, but they have left aside the feminist and gender perspective as well. So in this chapter, I focus on analyzing that. And also regarding climate change, there is a connection with these topics when we think about forced displacement and internal displacement due to climate-related shocks and crises that are increasing these displacements that lead the population to go to the outskirts of cities where, for example, in Colombia, there's a high presence of armed groups, not only internationally recognized, but localized groups that are also increasing vulnerabilities and can end in a second, third, or more displacement. Climate change is also an increasing risk that it's pressing not only in Colombia and the global south, but everywhere. So the vulnerabilities that these populations are suffering will be exacerbated over time if we don't start taking some measures. This is ASCOMAN. They are the community I told you about. So they were the hosts in Montes de Maria. The community is located in Monteria, in the Caribbean of the country. Most of them are victims of armed conflict. Some of them are returnees from forced displacement, and others stayed in their territory and consider themselves survivors or resistance. The place where they are was especially impacted by the presence of paramilitary groups in the early 2000s. And nowadays they have changed their agricultural practices to agroecology, rediscovering their patios, and now they are the providers and allies, as they define it, of the top chefs in the country. So there's a 50 best restaurants list per region in the Latin American list. They partner with 90% of the chefs in the list being their allies. So now they're selling their produce to them, changing their practices with the territory, with the work they perform, and this has 3%, and this exposes particular change and switch of mentality for women in the community that I will speak of in the upcoming slides. So a little bit about the process. So for the data collection, there were 2 rounds of data collection for the Gastronomy and Peace research project. The first one was with the chefs in the list that are listed as the restaurants within the 50 best restaurants list for Latin America, the ones that are in Colombia, mostly in the cities of Bogota, Medellin, and Cartagena. Why these restaurants? Because they have more capital and resources to travel around the country and explore these different ingredients that they are interested in for innovation purposes, which has led them to develop these relationships with the community and building a bond with their producers. I also used natural language processing. And the second round was the one conducted during the field work in the Caribbean with the funding of the International Development Research, as the International Development Research Center's research awardee for the Climate Resilient Food Systems Program. Also, for analyzing the data, I use natural language processing, agroecology finance assessment tool, and the field notes during my time in the Caribbean with them. So a little bit about the participants. This shows 3 different angles and 3 different perspectives. So the interviews, the interview questionnaire is completely comparable with the 3 buckets of participants, although ASCOMAN took place 1 year later. As you can see, chefs, 10 are men, 1 is a woman. There's another woman that I didn't interview that is in the list. But as you can see, even though women are the traditional cooks and have the care work, when we're talking about the recognition in the gastronomic sector, we have predominantly men. There's a ASCOMAN that there's a more even distribution, 10 men and 10 women. And the researchers are 6 men and 7 women. the researchers were not chosen by a specific criteria, but by recommendation of the chefs and the links with the topic, since this is an intersection of topics that it's not very frequent. So a little bit about the findings. This is the Agroecology Finance Assessment Tool. One thing that it's important to mention is that in order for a proposal to be considered to be agroecological, there has to be a gender perspective. If it excludes women in any way, it can no longer be considered agroecological within this framework. There are several components. These are the 13 principles of agroecology that have been talked and discussed in international settings, including the summits presided by FAO. And as you can see, there is a gap in participation, which is the most political part of the AFAP tool. So this is considering the relations with land, with the partners, thinking about the fairness of the exchanges between the producers and the consumers and different steps in the food systems chain. And some of these aspects, although it's not incorporated as one of the principles, is the elements related to climate change and climate adaptation. So for the case study, the opportunities are to fill the gap within the participation, increasing the visibility and leadership of women in this process in particular, although this is a case study and there is a need for further research to see if there can be a replication of this experience of ASCOMAN or not. But for the analysis of ASCOMAN in particular, there is a connection in the participation area, in the participation principle, sorry. It leverages the position of women and their role as caregivers who are already at the center of the household, that are making decisions about the family's finances, what they eat, which has also been directly linked by the community in terms of everyday peace. So they, in the previous chapter, have a direct connection between selling and eating healthy food with considering they are experiencing peace in their everyday lives. Also, a renewed relationship with the public sector and institution after and during the armed conflict, and even during the post-conflict time. They have a breach of trust with the public institutions and the government. And now, as their project has evolved and now they feel that they have a higher agency of their lives and life projects, they are seeking or more open to collaborate and receive this kind of support from public institutions. Also, the authorship and knowledge sharing is another part that it's important to complete, that agroecology suggests that there is an importance of having farmer-to-farmer knowledge sharing, and it's not only about top-down or bottom-up, but also scaling out. And this is a part that they need to work further, since all the knowledge they're producing and they're sharing with their fellow farmers and their neighbors, and they're open to share with other communities, has not been recognized as their knowledge, but it's something that someone can easily go and take from them and use it. The contributions of this intersection of topics is that it strengthens the agroecology as a viable scientific and social alternative that is also related to addressing the root causes of conflict. It removes the burden of women in the agroecological transformations, because a lot of critiques have suggested that now women have the extra task that are in agroecological projects of selling the produce, putting up farmers markets, so they're exchanging vulnerabilities. But in this case with ASCOMAN, because they're partnering directly with restaurants and with the gastronomic sector, that is not a burden, and that's a differentiated finding of this case study in compared to others in other regions and countries in Latin America. There is a triple nexus between peace, food systems, and climate change, and it addresses the root causes of conflict and contributing risk factors like climate change that are increasing their vulnerabilities, and it's strengthening their capacities to stay in their territory, improve their relationship with the territory, and also expanding the comprehension of care work to non-human life and to the environment, because that's something that we haven't spoken about a lot until now, but that's also a task and a work that women are doing in the territory. They're making informed decisions with their knowledge of the territory. They now know when to plant something next to what, and now they're believing more in their expertise and their traditional knowledge than what someone is telling them that they need them to produce. There are also renewed relationships with other fellow citizens, in this case the chefs and the gastronomic sector and the researchers that are visiting, that this can be linked and will be explored in the next chapter in the thesis, using civic trust as one of the intermediate objectives of transitional justice, and also the currency for renewing these relationships and helping or partnering with communities to advance in the sustainable development agenda, but not from an exploitative perspective of the campesino communities. The comparison between the gender roles for ASCOMAN chefs and researchers also shows correlation in terms of leadership, innovation, education. One of the findings specifically for ASCOMAN, and some of the researchers also mentioned it, is the novelty of women perceiving their own income and how the gender roles are complementary. So for example, men in the interviews, they expressed how they now acknowledge and feel also proud that they know they can have a certain amount of kilos of cassava and they can sell that in X price, but when women transform that same amount into cassava flour and they sell it to the chefs and the restaurants, they are making 50% or 100% more. And that's being income directly for women, which is also helping them feel more self-confidence, have trust, and finding value on how they spend their time, on learning and exchanging knowledge and techniques with the chefs, recovering traditional recipes with the elders. So that has also been a game changer. In terms of knowledge sharing, they are proud of cooking in these cuisines and in these restaurants, and chefs are also proud of partnering and telling stories through their plates of these communities, of the country, of the biomes in Colombia, and of peace. So there are some of the stories, for example, told by chefs when they worked with communities in the south, that they worked with a community that was a participant in a crop substitution program, that they used to have coca leaves for the production of cocaine, and now they're having palmitos, palm, and acai and other Amazonic produce. So when he first went to visit and work with the community, the landscape changed to the next visits, and he also told the story of how they seemed so different, and they were now proud, looking him in the eyes and like, this is what we're doing, and how this changed, and how this relationships with the cuisine, and knowing that their products are shared in the cities and with international visitors as well, and tourists, is a source of pride for them. Also, chefs that are allies of ASCOMAN told stories of how women were very shy in the beginning. They were not sure if they wanted to be part of the association or not, and now they're the ones that are innovating. Now they want to become a company, they now want to sell more products, and now they're thinking on partnering with other women in the community and inviting people to join, because it has transformed their lives, and now they are recognized as the leaders and the drivers of change and progress for ASCOMAN. And researchers showed a more public policy approach in terms of education, resilience, consistency that was also mentioned by chefs, saying that they prefer to work with women because once women are happy and engaged in a project, they tend to be more consistent. That they are the protagonists of these projects and the transformation not only in food systems but in a bigger social scope, like post-conflict and transitional justice project. So the general aspects of the role of gender in the research are women as knowledge bearers, as change makers, and that once they can cover these basic needs, they can start thinking of other things, and they are now expanding to other areas, like thinking more for their economic development, their independence, what they can teach, how they become more engaged with, for example, school meal programs in the region, that they have something to show and that they transform their lives and that they can teach other women how to do that. And also trust, as I mentioned earlier. So a little bit about the potential of the gender approach to overcome root causes of conflict and inequity. In Peacebuilding, we have that, what I mentioned about the root causes, the civic trust, and the long-term impact involving women. And once they have covered their satisfied needs, it's easier to talk to them about memory, about justice, about truth-telling. But when they have these needs uncovered, and in the previous chapter, there's a discussion on how they are now eating more diverse, how they're eating more healthy, how they're not skipping meals. And during the field work, it was evident the difference of the plate and the distribution of macronutrients when we visited someone that was a member of ASCOMAN, and that wasn't. So from including non-animal protein sources and working more with the beans that are very characteristic in the region, to seeing other members of the community that would eat mostly carbs and very few vegetables. In terms of food system transformation, it improves food insecurity and sovereignty, and there's this idea expressed by one of the ASCOMAN members that is actually an agronomist that has helped them and has helped them transform and navigate the transition to agroecology. And it's edible and profitable biodiversity. So for example, instead of cutting a tree and sell the wood, now that tree has more value if they're going to get X amount of fruit that they are going to sell every year. So they have rediscovered their patios, saving money because they're not using, for example, spices bought in the market, but they're doing their own, they're making their own, and they're also having plans to plant more trees and more plants that are contributing to the agroecological system that they have in place, covering their basic needs, helping their neighbors also cover those needs. And in terms of climate change, this increases the biodiversity in the region, makes them more resilient to climate-related crises and less likely to have to be internally displaced again due to an absence of resources. And there are some quotes from the participants that I have there. We teach that sewing, cooking, and eating are political habits. That is something that they have very present. The agroecology is also a response to climate change. So now they know that what they're doing matters, not only in terms of peace building or just overcoming poverty, but also adding to bigger agendas like climate change. And women in the kitchen don't need to be empowered, they need obstacles to be removed. And this was said by one of the chefs that were participating in the research project, and this is food for thought and later in the conclusions. This is a quote from one of the participants in ASCOMAN. Before our place was the household, now we are women of strength, work, and ideas. And now one of the things they value the most is their ideas and the work they do in their household with their grandchildren and children, but also in the community and their thrive to keep growing and conquering more spaces. So some of the conclusions are women's lived experiences as valuable data and not as a checklist, as there have been a lot of projects that have included women or have to meet a certain quota of women that are participating in international cooperation or public policy projects or programs, but they're not really incorporating their ideas and their lived experiences, but only as a checklist. There's also the transformation of women's lives is the transformation of the family, the community, and the society. They amplify the definition of care work to include the environment and non-human life. That networks of care and trust developed by women lead to cooperation and transformation of life plans. As I mentioned, some of them were very eager to share this knowledge and the experience they've had with other women in the country, from other regions, to welcome everyone and share the knowledge that they have so far. The complementary work of the roles of men and women, it was very interesting to hear during the interviews that they do not wish to fulfill the same tasks, especially considering that the big crops like maize and cassava require a very physical work, and they are more content in the transformation of products that they can do from their patios, but they do want to get more tools to technify these processes. The political impact of individual decision making regarding food in terms of food security and food sovereignty, and food's value in culture, politics, and economic as a political act. Also food as a cohesive narrative for a national collective like Colombia. So Colombia is a highly divided society, and the peace agreement implementation has been very contested. And one of the general aspects in the interviews was the pride of biodiversity, the pride of the natural resources of the country, that we have a lot to show, that we have a lot to try, a lot of products, of fruits and vegetables and fishes and meats and beans and all sorts of produce to try from different regions, and that offers an alternative to unify a country that it's very divided, that it's very unequal, and that has people in the cities not knowing anything about the lives and the everyday lives of their fellow citizens in the rural areas. And these kind of restaurants and narratives that have exposure in social media, in television, or that are even celebrated as stars or recognized figures in the country, they can start changing that narrative. And even though it is a political act, it has the capacity to step aside from that controversial aspect of what the peace agreement has signified in Colombia. The participants also highlighted the importance to do management of food loss and waste. This is important also in the climate resilient part of the nexus, and also in the food systems transformation. And trust as a currency to build new relationships in post-conflict contexts, that I will research and analyze in the next chapter, considering these kind of restaurants, social innovation hubs where citizens can meet and hear different stories and exchange knowledge and experiences. And that's it.